Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and empowers you to live a more vibrant second half. Today, I'm going to be talking to a woman who is an artist and a former psychotherapist. She is a woman who is creative and passionate and has started this new journey after midlife. And I thought she would be a great guest. Valerie Ellis is with me today. Valerie, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome, Gina. I know you're in California. I'm currently in the UK. So for me, it's the evening and you, it's the morning, isn't it?
Oh, that's right. We do have you in a completely different time zone. Yeah. And I do want to thank you for, after a long day, joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So tell us a little bit about your journey. You were a psychotherapist, and then at some point you turned to full-time artistry as your career. Tell us about that.
That's right. Yeah, I was a psychotherapist for 20 years. That really came about because of my experience as a child. So I know a lot of people have an experience in their childhood where they don't feel like they were really properly nurtured. They may have felt abused or neglected and weren't given the foundation that they really needed to thrive in life. And that was certainly my experience as well. Both of my parents came from a dysfunctional background, and we all know this is sort of intergenerational experience. And I left childhood deeply unhappy and unskilled at life. And someone very kind gave me a book, and it explained psychology. I'd never heard of psychology as a child. We never talked about our feelings at home, how to get along with each other. So a book on psychology really almost literally opened my eyes. It felt like up until that point, I had walked through life with my eyes shut. And once I understood that I had an inner world, that I had a mind, I had ambitions, I had feelings, I had memories and beliefs and ideas that were shaping the way I behaved. Once I understood that, I understood that I could improve my life, because up until that point, you're just a victim of the way you've been taught to behave, aren't you? So that was, for me, the catalyst to become a psychotherapist. Once I read that book, I determined, right, this is what I want my life to be about. I want to grow and develop as a person. And so I went to night school and I did correspondence classes so I could get into university. And I studied psychology at the University of Queensland in Brisbane in Australia. That's
amazing. And how long was that journey?
That's a 4-year degree. So it's an honors degree in psychology with a double major, blah, blah, blah. And after I graduated from that, my first job was actually in the prison and probation service in Australia, which is called community corrections. And so I had, in the course of doing that, I went into the maximum security men's prison and the maximum security women's prison in Brisbane. So that's definitely an eye-opener. And it certainly put my own life in perspective as well. So even though I feel deeply that I didn't have the start in life that I would have liked, when you go into a prison setting, obviously you see people who've really had a hard time. So it's often the case that people in that situation have suffered the worst experiences in childhood. And it's part of the way that they manifest that to be antisocial and break the law. That's not to forgive it, of course, but to explain it. So going into prisons certainly for me put my own suffering in perspective. So I wasn't happy with how I'd been parented, but I understood at that point it wasn't as bad as it could have been in that bigger context. So it started out after university with that sort of work. And then I went into private practice. So that's the sort of thing people think of with a therapist, where you go into a room, you sit in chairs and you talk to each other.
Yeah. Now, how did it come about that you moved toward art? Did it start out as some kind of therapy for you that blossomed into a passion?
Well, I would like to say that it's something as noble as that, but I'll be honest with you, I am a very vain person. And what changed for me was, I remember being in the car and I looked down at my hand, and the back of my hand wasn't quite as youthful as it had been. And I remember looking at my hand going, oh no, it looks like I'm aging. Oh, I'm probably going to get old and die at some point. And that really became a reality because of what I saw in my hand. And obviously your face, you look at yourself in the mirror and realizing at that point, well, I'm not eternally going to stay the same. I don't have forever to live the life that I would have liked. So if I'm going to do anything, I've got between now and the end to do it. So it was vanity, if nothing else, that sort of triggered my realization that there's a time limit. So I realized that the first half of my life was a reaction to my childhood, that it was all about fixing that up and becoming, I suppose, getting from a minus to at least a zero position, getting from being unskilled at life and unhappy to being skillful, insightful, a happier person. But realizing that the life that I had lived as a therapist was only because I had been hurt as a child. If I had had a better childhood, if I'd been parented in a loving, supportive way, I would not have been a therapist. That's not who I would have been. So I asked myself, well, who would I be? And then I knew I would have been an artist. I know from my childhood talents that art is what I am as a person. And so that's the moment where I think, okay, I need to stop living the life that's fixing up my childhood, and I need to start living the life that I should have, that I deserve, that's the fulfillment of my potential, that's not about the wounds, it's not about the hurt. So, and I knew that was about art because of the talents that I had as a child. So that was the moment I'm like, right, artist is the thing to do and to be going forward.
And for you, having been a psychotherapist, you know, that there was probably some analytical process going on behind that for yourself, was there not?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very observant of myself now. Like I said, my family are what I would call unconscious. Something happens to them and they react emotionally. They get angry or upset. They blame other people. There is very victim-y kind of culture in my family, and they have no idea they have an inner world, that inner world idea. They have no idea that when something happens to them on the outside, they interpret it on the inside. They have a feeling that drives a behavior, and that behavior creates a reality for them. For them, all they see is the bad thing happened and it upset me and spoilt my life. And that's how I was as a child. The bad thing happened to me, upset me and spoilt my life. And through psychotherapy, I learned, well, hang on a minute, bad things happen to lots of people. Some people make the best of it and some people don't. So it's not the bad thing that determines completely the quality of your life. Some bad things are unovercomable, of course. But if you're in a good position, you can handle bad things by the way you perceive them, by the choices you make after them. And so that's what therapy does for people. It highlights the fact that you have an inner world that's the mediator between what happens to you and what you do next. So yes, I'm through being a therapist and the degree in psychology, I'm constantly trying to stay in that state. I'm trying to stay in the state of watching what's happening to me, watching my reaction. What are my thoughts about this? How am I interpreting it? What are my beliefs around this thing? How am I feeling because of that? And then how am I behaving next? And trying to manage that process so that the way I behave is ultimately beneficial to me rather than detrimental, as it would have been in my family of origin. So certainly, yes, you're right. I'm analyzing constantly what's happening, who I am, how I'm responding, what life do I want to build for myself? Absolutely.
So it sounds like a good strategy for someone would be to sit back and observe their life, not judge it, not criticize, but just really look at the decisions they've made, why they may have made those. And I think, to be fair, sometimes our decisions, they were the right decisions at the time. They suited a purpose, but they don't always fulfill the same purpose forever, do they?
Yeah. Look, you know what I would say is, I think a lot of people aren't deciding at all. In the personal growth movement, there's this idea that you're making a choice. That was your choice to behave that way, or that's a decision that you made.
Right.
I disagree, actually. A choice, you can only have a choice if you have at least two options. I can only choose if I know I could go here or here. There's only one one option available to me. I'm not having a choice at all. Decision making is a complicated process. It's a process of gathering information, considering your options, and testing out what happens if I go one way or another, or another, or another, or another. So I believe most people aren't deciding at all. There's no choosing and deciding. There's reacting. There's when I was a child, I was taught that if someone is rude to you, you get aggressive back. That's not a choice. That's training. That's conditioning. Mm-hmm. You only make a choice when you could react angrily back, or you could be kind and considerate, or you could be thoughtful and strategic. But if you don't have those other options, you're not choosing at all. So the first thing to become aware of is this inner process of the way that we interpret what happens to us determines how we feel, and how we feel is determining how we behave, and our behavior is determining the quality of our life. Until you've understood that and watched yourself do it, watched yourself go, you know what? They did that thing. I got shitty with them and angry at them. And that's why I did what I did back. Not because of what they did to me, but because of how I felt about it. And whenever I do that, I get into trouble, I lose a job, or I lose a friend, or whatever. And I'm creating my loneliness. I'm creating my lack of career development because of the way I'm behaving, because of the way I'm interpreting, because of what people do. So once you've got some insight into that and you can see it, only then could you possibly make a choice. Once you've got decision making in your head apparent to you, and once you've created options for yourself in your life. There's a lot of people struggling because they don't truly have choices. They have a very hard life, and they don't understand that they're making decisions, or that they have options at all. So how can they be held responsible for making a decision when they're not decision making at all?
Yes, it's that process of coming to the place of personal responsibility and separating ourselves from those things happening to us, and recognizing that just because it happened doesn't equal this one thing.
That's precisely it. That personal responsibility is the core concept. And for me, that's a real difference between some people and another. Once you've explored the concept of personal responsibility, it changes you as a person. That for me is the big decider between some people and others, people that you want to hang out with or people you don't want to hang out with. That's a massive difference. You're exactly right.
And I think that impacts in this season of life where we are in the middle, we have a lot of decisions to make, don't we? People are transitioning in many, many ways, physically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes relationally, sometimes occupationally. There's a lot of things happening. And what I hear you saying, and what's so powerful about what you're talking about, is it applies so perfectly to this process of, call it reinvention, rebirth, pivoting, whatever the word is that someone relates to. This empowers the ability to make a pivot or reinvent yourself in a way that is fulfilling, satisfying, joyful, purposeful. Because I think there are a lot of things that we do in the first half of our life as a role that we play. The thing that we should do, the person we should be. And while not all of it is evil or malignant, sometimes it's a benign thing, but at some point, I think midlife brings us to a crux where we feel conflict, maybe. I've talked to some women, there's a conflict, like, okay, well, I did this. I don't want to do that anymore. But absolutely. Who do I want to be, and where do I go from here? And I think that's a powerful part of your story is you did a lot of work in the first half of your life, which I also have done. And it brings you to a place of thoughtfulness in the world that you inhabit, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Look, I think it's a good example that just the things you chose early on aren't necessarily bad. Sometimes they are. But, if you'd chosen to be a nurse because your grandma was a nurse and your mother was a nurse and the pressure was on you to be a nurse, I would argue, did you really choose to be a nurse, or were you just submitting to familial pressure? And at 19, who's making choices and decisions really. And it's not that you might regret having been a nurse for 20 years, but you might just think, you know what, I'm done with it. I'm done being a nurse or a teacher or somebody's wife, a certain person's wife or whatever else. I'm done with that. It's my turn now.
Mm-hmm. And I think it doesn't have to be either or, it can be both. And for some people, like if you're fortunate enough to be in an environment where you might be able to pivot within the job that you do, because some people are adjacent to something that they love.
Yeah.
They're not quite living in it. Like for some people, they enjoy this. Maybe teaching nurses would be like the passion of their life. Or like you, it might be jumping ship and choosing a completely different path. So let's talk about how when you hit that point, how did you hit that point, and what was your process to shift to art?
Well, it was that sort of realization of no longer being eternally youthful. And I'd also been thinking for a while, I lived in Australia for 30 years. But before that, I'd actually grown up in England, and Australia is a fantastic place to live. It's heaven on earth in many respects, but I felt a kinship to England. I feel as a person, Englishy as a person.
Yeah.
And I had considered for a long time going back to England. So it seemed there was a sort of moment when I could combine going back to England with moving back to the art as well. And going back to, so there was a sense of returning to a place and a thing that had been left dormant and needed to be cultivated. So I moved back to England conveniently 6 months before COVID lockdown. And that was when I went, right, this is the time to do the art. I'd done the art for a couple of years before that. And before that, I'd always done arty things. I think anyone who's watching who's creative has always done arty things, even if it's just making food that's creative or a garden or whatever. But this is the point where I said, right, actually, let's see if I can do this for a career. Let's see if I can live the life that I would have lived if I'd had loving, nurturing parents who recognized my talent and herded me in that direction, encouraged me in that direction. So that was what the goal became, to fulfill that.
Mm-hmm. You were essentially nurturing yourself as a
absolutely.
child. Like, how would I have, what did I need?
Yes.
And how would I have been able to walk in this purpose, if you will,
Absolutely.
if I had had the support?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think if I could suppose that was for you, not done in a reactionary, well, now I'm going to show them, was probably more joyous and more at peace, just a real curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly not it's not a sort of vengeful motivation. It's a self-loving thing, and relatively well considered, as in it was leaving behind Australia, where I'd lived for 30 years and made friends and had a home, and coming back to England and setting up again. And if anybody's watching who's moved town, city or country halfway through life, it's very hard to make connections in midlife. We make connections easily in childhood, but once you get through midlife, people's friend card is full generally. So it's difficult to make friends. And it's just difficult to adapt in general. Like, you've become used to doing things a certain way. Literally when I moved from Australia to England, just simple things like going to the supermarket and assessing value. So for example, if I went to the supermarket in Australia and a certain food was a certain price, I would know, oh, that's a good price, or that's a bit high, or oh, that's a good discount. When I came to England, there would be a price on food and I'd think, well, I don't know, is that a high price? Is it a low price? A good price? So just literally food shopping, the simplest thing of all, going and finding food, I couldn't tell if the prices on the food were fair and reasonable. And that's because I moved one country to another, and I've had to figure out, oh, that's a good price for broccoli or a chicken or fish or whatever. And that's that verse, as well as on top of that, renting property, buying materials, clothes, transport systems to try to figure out. Driving in England, it's on the same side of the road as Australia, but there are subtle differences that you have to pay attention to. There's a culture on the road here that's different to Australian culture on the road. So it's just amazing. It's everything is different, just a tiny bit, just a tiny bit, but everything.
So there's energy being spent in directions that you wouldn't expect. So what I hear you saying is, when you make a change, maybe we could set an expectation of, there's a gap between what you're comfortable with and know, and what's unknown and maybe uncomfortable. And you can close that gap. You just have to be patient with the process, is what I hear you saying.
I think what you said before was really nailed it, that there was energy spent in directions you wouldn't have thought of. That's exactly it. That I thought, oh, I just come here. Well, I knew it'd be hard. I wasn't naive. I knew that it would be difficult. And I said to myself regularly, this is going to be very, very hard, very challenging. Don't expect it to be easy. But it was hard in ways I hadn't expected. And like I said, it was hard it was a difference in every way. It was, everything was different. Every little tiny thing was different, a little bit. So you're right, there's a lot of energy just in food shopping, just in driving on the road, just in, I mean, buying a car in England was, such a challenge versus Australia. So that's exactly right. And so the energy that you would like to put into your dream is being put into just adjusting life to how you'd like it to be.
Now, did you literally leave psychotherapy and do the art thing? What was your transition like?
Well, I actually thought what I could do was start a psychotherapy practice in England and do the art and sort of do a transition. But because I came here at the end of summer holidays where people aren't thinking of therapy and they're going on holidays, and before Christmas, and people don't think of therapy at Christmas. So it wasn't a great time. And then COVID hit and we had to lock down. So for a year, I couldn't really do much at all. So I was really, really stuck in terms of achieving anything, and also financially, it was very demanding. So quickly I thought, well, that's not going to work. I'll do the art, because you can do the art alone in a room. The good thing about COVID was it was okay to spend a lot of time in a room on your own doing whatever you wanted. So COVID gave me a year to do art, and I set up a huge studio and started sort of painting and drawing a lot to develop the skills in that. Since then, I actually picked up a client just randomly, someone who knew me and knew I was a therapist, said, oh, look, can I come and see you? I said, look, I don't really do the therapy thing anymore. She's like, please. I'm like, okay, all right, I'll just, if you really, really want that, I'll do it. But I'm an artist now, okay? So yes, maybe it'll go the other way, I don't know.
It's funny because I've been a makeup artist for over 30 years, like 33 plus years. And every time I think, okay, I'm done with makeup, I'm doing this other thing, someone will come up and be like, can you please, I'm getting married, or my sister's getting married. And my husband just laughs, because it's every time I try to sever that part of me, something pops up. So I think that's an interesting part of the conversation. Sometimes, like I said earlier, it can be both and. Sometimes they blur a little. Some people make clean cuts, and that's totally fine. But yours sounds like it was a mostly clean cut with the periodic.
Tiny, Look, and I think the other thing is, don't let these invitations to go back make you think you're meant to go back. So people will sometimes say things like, oh, well, someone asked me to go do nursing again, or be a therapist again, or be a makeup artist again. That must mean that I'm supposed to go back to that, and I'm not supposed to go here. Rubbish. You're meant to do what you're meant to do. What you choose fulfills your potential as a human. There's a thing that you're meant to do. I know this as a therapist. From a sort of objective, I can argue this theoretically point of view, but also experientially, there is absolutely a thing you're meant to do. If you haven't done it already, that's okay, but don't let the fact that people might invite you back make you think you're not meant to do that. Of course that's going to happen. That's just a practical thing of life. People see you in a certain role, you have a certain skill set that people are going to call upon. If you want to do it again, that's your choice now that you can choose, you've got at least two options now. But don't interpret that as some kind of message from the universe. That's rubbish. That's just a normal thing. People ask other people to do things in their skill set. That's going to happen. Your calling in here should drive you forward. And the fact that it's difficult shouldn't make you think you're not meant to do it either. I've heard people say this as well. Oh, if it's hard, you're not meant to do it. Or if you're meant to do it, you'll just flow into it easily. I'm resisting the urge right now to swear because I know Americans are very sensitive about swearing in a way that English people aren't actually. But I'm going to resist the urge of that because it's rubbish, absolute rubbish. Lots of meaningful things that people were clearly meant to do. A lot of vital, important things that people did were hard to do. So hardness is not the measure of whether you're not meant to do it. Easiness is not the measure of whether you're meant to do it. Have you crystallized clearly who you are as a person and what you're meant to do to fulfill your potential in the world? That's the only thing that you should be focused on, not how hard or easy it is. And you can do things to make it easier for yourself, because why would you make it harder?
Right. I love what you said, that just because it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't follow through. Developing that muscle of being able to do hard things is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the reason a lot of things were easier when we were 18, 19, 20, 21 is because we didn't have a mortgage, we didn't have a car, we didn't have children, we didn't have a partner, we weren't burdened by the burdens of the world. People were hurrying us into our career of being a nurse or a makeup artist or whatever. So it seemed easy back then because to a large extent it was made easy, because life is easier when you're 19 in general. So again, the easiness of how it was isn't necessarily the measure of that was what I was meant to do. Forget easiness and hardness. Make things as easy as possible for yourself in terms of what you want to do to fulfill yourself.
And I think maybe that curiosity piece, being curious about what is it that's driving you? What is it that is drawing you? Like you said, knowing yourself, that awareness of what it is that makes you want to do whatever that thing is. Write a book, travel, quit your job and do a documentary. I talked to a woman who at 65 left her corporate job that she created and loved because she wanted to make film, but she didn't know how. So I think there's this, like you're saying, if we're talking flow, I would say it's not that everything comes in flow easily, but there's a flow to where you're feeling drawn. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. There's a flow in what you want to do. Like when you're doing, I'm sure as a skill set, when we're doing being a makeup artist, there's a sense of when you're doing it, it feels good. It feels nice to do it. And what you're doing now, what you're being an inspiration to people, an influencer, trying to, galvanize women to fulfill their potential. That's hard. But when you're in the middle of it, like right now, this doesn't feel hard now.
No, it brings me great joy. Yes,
exactly. Round the periphery is probably hard, but doing the thing at the time will be easy. But that's not a measure, an indicator of that it was meant to be. The ease with which you can do something is typically a measure of the skills that you have developed in doing it and a natural talent that you have. Mm-hmm. So you'll have something that you're drawn to that's a talent. I can guarantee it. Anyone I talk to knows somewhere deep down inside what they're really, really drawn to and good at. Then you develop a skill set on that, and that's where ease comes from in doing what you're doing. But getting to it may be difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a graciousness with ourselves in that process, isn't there? Like a patience. I remember being very frustrated as I was working through things in my own life. The process used to just frustrate me because the word process was even irritating because
it is irritating, isn't it?
Because you couldn't just tie it in, like deal with it, tie it in a box and stick it on a shelf. There was like layers to the onion. So I feel like reminding ourselves that like there were layers to the onion in the more challenging parts of our life, right? There's layers to growth as well. There's things we have to shed. There's belief systems we have to shed. There's roles we may need to shed. There's ideas about ourselves and the world that we need to shed. Mindsets about, can I do this? I can't do this. Money, whatever it is, like there's layers to this growth, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely right. I remember getting upset about, at the beginning of doing the art, I was upset about some things. And someone said, and in talking it through with someone, I realized, well, they said to me, yes, but there's going to be problems, isn't there? And I thought, oh, okay, I see what I'm doing here. I'm upset about the problem, the content of the problem, but I'm also upset about the fact that I have a problem at all to deal with. And what I was doing was assuming that it wouldn't be hard, that I shouldn't have problems, that there wouldn't be problems. And really realizing, oh, well, if I want to go from here to over there will be problems between me and there that I have to solve. So I can focus my energy on solving the problem, or I can spend a lot of my energy being upset about the fact that I have a problem at all. And that's a real waste of time. And this is very much a family trait of mine, that my family were really into problems and talking about them, struggling and embracing them. They're very problem-focused people. They're not solution-focused people. And so this idea that you shouldn't have a problem, that's outrageous, how dare life give me a problem I have to solve, was something I had to confront again and go, oh, hang on a minute. Well, of course there's going to be problems if I want something over there. I want something new, a whole new life. So face the problem, accept that it's there, solve it, go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one. Just keep solving them until you get to where you want to be. And it's endless. It's a function of life, the sort of the mechanics of life, that there are going to be challenges. So at least invest your energy in solving problems as opposed to being upset about having problems at all.
It's so true. You just sometimes get tired of it. And to your point earlier, when you're 19, what you're carrying into life is a lot less than 50, 55, 60. We have lived a life. We have, like you said, mortgages, cars, possibly children, possibly businesses, possibly marriages, or, everything has left a mark on our life in some way, positively and negatively. And we carry that with us. And it tends to be like different pairs of glasses that color the way we view different things in our lives. And I feel like there's an unearthing to some degree to make these kinds of pivots in your life. It takes courage, right? And it takes determination, right? I mean, it seems like in anything I've done to move in a direction, sometimes it feels like you're climbing uphill in mud. But if your purpose, you know where you're headed, like you said, you're looking for that solution to the problem. You're looking toward the goal, which is the thing that you're meant to do deep down. Now, what advice do you have for someone who maybe hasn't become that aware of what they want to do? Like the gap, or they might think of something, but the story is so strong against it, because some people are like, oh, I could never do that, or I'd love to, but there's no way I could support my family, or, all the stories that we have. How does one begin to honor that pull?
I think find someone who you can talk to, a therapist or not necessarily a therapist, but find someone who you can talk to who doesn't have an agenda. Someone who doesn't want you to keep doing the old thing, but they don't necessarily want you to do the new thing either. So they're not trying to push you in any direction. You're really looking for someone who can help you sort through your thought process. Someone who, you say, well, I can't do that. I don't think I can do that. It might be true. If you've gotten to 50, you're probably not going to be the prima ballerina of the New York ballet school, are you? So sorry to break it to you, that's probably true. so someone might have to be honest enough with you to go, you know, I think it is going to be that particular way of looking at this isn't going to work for you, but how about this? So someone who's like the better version of you, someone wise and calm with no agenda, who you can at least talk it through with, so you can make the thoughts external. When they get tangled up in your head, it's very difficult to untangle them. So, and someone who can help you sort through, as you say, the beliefs and ideas that you have that you've collected along the way. Some of them are going to be brilliant ideas that you should keep, and some of them are going to be outdated or only applicable in certain situations. So I think do that. Find someone very neutral who you can talk to. Find someone successful who you can talk to. So if you are clear about where you want to go, find someone who's successful in what you want to do and ask them how to do it. So I'm not a fan of problems or doing it the hard way. It's not virtuous. That's not virtuous at all. If you can talk to someone who's already doing it and ask them how to do it and what mistakes to avoid, I would 100% do that every time. I have watched hundreds of hours of interviews with successful artists, listening for every tiny little thing I can on how to do this well. I'm not interested in reinventing how to be a successful artist from scratch. I will do my own art, but that's not the same as how to be a great artist. So that's another thing I did, was look how to do it. So if you want to be, I don't know, a ballerina or run a dog grooming business or go horse riding across wherever, find someone who's done it and ask them how to do it. I think that's another really important thing as well. A third thing I would suggest is if you Google something called the 9 intelligences, you'll start to have some idea about your talent. So people, because of genetics and the way the brain is structured, people actually do have specific talents. This is just a fact. It's not a fluffy sort of idea, spiritual kind of a thing. People have actual talents that they're born for, that they're good at naturally. We often overlook them because we're good at it easily, and we often think the things that are easy aren't important, or someone probably told us when we were young that didn't matter and to focus on something else. But you need to figure out the talent part, the thing you're really naturally good at. And there's something called the 9 intelligences, which would help you start to narrow that down. So in the past, research psychologists came up with the idea of the IQ, the idea of intelligence, but it's specific to a certain kind of academic intelligence. If you want to go onto Wikipedia, you can learn about what intelligence. It was actually the idea was developed by French psychologists back in the late 1800s, I think it was. But it focuses very much on academic intelligence. And there are actually other types of intelligence. Specifically, intelligence at the core is the ability to see patterns in something and reproduce them. So it's not maths, it's not being able to pass tests at school, but it's the ability to discern patterns and reproduce them. And that's what the core of intelligence is. So you can apply that to various fields. So for me, I have aesthetic intelligence. I see things very clearly. I see patterns visually in art, and then I can reproduce them. I can see your face. I can see things that other people won't, and I can draw it and make it look like you. Somebody else, for example, would have what's called mechanical intelligence. So they can look at an engine, pull it apart, see how it works, put it back together again, without necessarily having been taught how to do it. So they see a pattern in mechanics and they can reproduce it. So everybody listening has some sight, some capacity to see patterns in some field of the world and reproduce them skillfully, quickly, easily, at high standard in a way that others can't. If you can figure out your specific intelligence, what people colloquially call talent, and you can add skill to that, cultivate the skill. It's not enough just to have it. Nobody is, people are born talented musicians, but they don't just pick up a violin and play a concerto. They have to be taught how to do it.
Yeah.
So you add skill and learning on top of your talent, and then you excel. That's the area you will excel in. Your talent plus your skills learned.
Mm-hmm. That's really powerful. And it feels very, I can see how some people might feel that it is a little bit out there. Like that's hard to anchor into. So let's use your transition, for example. So you jumped into art and you studied and you practiced it. Of course, you did have quarantine, like you said, where you could be alone in a room for days and it was totally acceptable. So that was a unique situation. But once you made that pivot, how did you not just make art, but make art a career?
Well, just on the talent thing, this is something people have in their childhood. So if people are confused, you say, I'm having a hard time grasping onto this. You can ask other people. Other people often know what your talent is that you can't see. It's something you excelled in as a child, possibly not something that was a school subject. But for me, it was. So for me, for example, I did art as a subject at school. And I did my art exam, and we had to go into a room, and there was a person clothed, because we were young, so there were no naked models or anything. So clothed person, I had to draw them as part of my art exam. So I drew them in the exam, and then I went to leave. And my teacher said, well, hang on a minute, where are you going? Where's your portfolio? And I said, well, what portfolio? And she said, well, the portfolio you're supposed to have been making all year. Now, I liked art as a student, but I'd been in the art class every time. I hadn't even heard that I was supposed to be making a portfolio. That was a symptom of how unhappy I was from my home. I spent all my time sort of introspective and interacting with the students around me, but not paying attention to what I was supposed to be doing. So she let me spend the rest of the afternoon making my portfolio for the year. So I spent basically an entire year's worth of art studies I did in one day, submitted it in my art exam, and I got the highest mark in the whole country that year, basically for one day's work. And if someone told me that as a client, I would say, well, why are you not doing that? Like, that's madness that you could do something so well, so easily. So you have a thing, the person listening now, you have a thing you were brilliant at as a child that other people could see that you might have forgotten or lost. Find that. So you have it. Just because it's not called a school subject, just because it wasn't a subject at school, might be maths, might be music, might be art, might be geography, whatever, I don't know. But it could be something that wasn't even called a subject at school, like interpersonal skills, like compassion, like spirituality, like wood carving. None of those are subjects at school, but you may have been a genius at it and what you need to fulfill. But yes, as you say, then there's doing it as a career. But that's when you come to asking somebody who's already good at it about how to do it, not how to do their thing. So if you love wood carving, oh, that's it, that's definitely my thing, wood carving. You would not go to another wood carver and ask, what should I carve? Because if you're truly that as a person, you would never want to be told by another wood carver what you should carve. The question you would have is, how do I make wood carving my career? How do I do this from a professional point of view? And they would be able to tell you that. The same with nursing, art, mathematics, or whatever. You don't need to be told how to do the thing. You need to be told how to do the thing as your life, how to live it.
And so how long have you been an artist full time?
So I've been in England now for 3 years. So it'd be 3 years as a full-time occupation.
And how does that feel for you? Where are you at in terms of your joy level with what you're doing?
Well, when I'm doing it, it's like nothing else matters. So that, you know, that's your thing. In terms of trying to do it as an identity, as a business or profession or whatever, it's hard. It's definitely hard. So I've had my first exhibition in London was cancelled twice because of COVID lockdowns. So there's the moment when a lot of people would say, oh, well, I'm not meant to do this. Rubbish. Okay. So I could have gone, oh, I'm not meant to do it, but I didn't. I was cancelled twice. I had to do the third time to do my first exhibition, and I carried on anyway because I'm not going to let COVID lockdown or anything else stop me. And then I had an exhibition last year at an art fair in London, and then from when we're talking now, I have another exhibition in a couple of weeks' time. That's late October 2022, late September 2022. And that's been difficult as well, but easier. Certainly easier than the first time. So by 3 times into it, it's hard but easier. So I notice the progress, and I'm getting better as an artist. I'm getting better at the logistics of the art, and also from a business point of view, being able to earn a living from it as well.
So as we wrap up our time together, Valerie, you've given a lot of great tips. You just gave some really wonderful strategies. What are 3 things you would encourage a woman who is inspired by you, maybe frustrated with where she's at, really does want to make a pivot? What 3 things would you encourage her to think about, do, consider?
I'd start with focusing on yourself. So the vast majority of women are encouraged from childhood to be very considerate of others and very other oriented. And I think that's a lovely quality. I'm not saying don't be considerate of others. I'm saying be considerate, include yourself in the sphere of consideration. Yeah. So start thinking, well, what would I like for breakfast? When would I like to get up in the morning? What exercise would I like to do? Would I like to drive the car today? Who would I like to invite over? What would I like to say no to? So start at the very least practicing focusing on yourself and cultivating your own taste and preferences and being able to express that and action that. You cannot fulfill your purpose, your talent, your ambitions if you don't honor yourself, cherish yourself, empower yourself. You've got to back yourself. And I don't mean in some fluffy, namby-pamby, spiritual dolphins and crystals kind of way. No, I mean in a real way, as in someone rings you up and says, can you do this? You say, I'm sorry, I'm doing this morning for me. I could do it tomorrow for you. So it's a practical thing. It is a practical thing to care about yourself. Not a fluffy imaginary thing. It's a practical thing. So start practicing. What do I want? How do I feel? What am I going to do? What am I going to say yes to? What am I going to say no to at the very beginning? So cultivate that skill, because in 5 years' time, if you're pursuing this and you're really invested, someone's going to try to stand in your way. 100% guarantee. I can guarantee to you right now, someone will stand in your way. And if you don't have the ability to go around or under or over, it's over for you. It's over for you because someone else stood in the way. Don't let them do that. Don't let that happen. So you've got to cultivate strength in yourself. Like I said, clarify what it is your thing is and nail it down and down and down and down and down more and more and more specifically. You'd be amazed at how very specific you could get in terms of what it is you want to do. If you don't have clarity on that, you're going to waste a lot of time going sideways and backwards and all the rest of it. A lot of energy, time on that when you need to be focused going forwards. Like I said, for me, it was sort of realizing through vanity that I'm going to run out of time at some point, and you will run out of time. So hurry up and crystallize what you want and nail it down. And then find the people who are going to help you get there. 100% can't do it on your own. That's just not going to happen. So find people who will be kind to you, who will help you, who can tell you how to do it, who inspire you. You need help along the way to push along. So at least those 3 things for sure.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Learning to focus on yourself, I like the way you worded it, include yourself in the way you live your life, because we tend
in your
to.
Consideration. Yeah, and consider yourself as well as others.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it, because I have had a little bit of an issue with this whole self-love thing that swings so far out of balance that the idea of including yourself grounds it a little bit. It's not, sometimes we do have to say, no, this boundary line here is where I'm going to stop. And that could feel uncomfortable, but it could be the best thing the woman can do, is to learn to set those boundaries.
Absolutely. Well, everyone deserves them. It's not the best thing a woman can do. It's a thing you must do. You must do that, or you'll be devoured by the world and other people.
And maybe some women are coming to this podcast feeling devoured. And I think this is a fantastic starting point to observe about ourselves. And then you said to clarify your thing, dial it in. You know, and you mentioned something in our conversation that I've utilized and I've encouraged some of my clients to utilize, is to ask 5 or 10 people in your life what 3 things they see in you. Like it could be a characteristic or a gift or whatever. And it's interesting to see how the world sees you. Not that they're making a decision for you, but sometimes you might agree, sometimes you might not agree, but it does give some clarity. Because we don't always see, as you said, our gifts as valuable. They're too easy. So we don't, it doesn't carry the weight that it does to the world around us.
Yeah, it's very much a sort of Protestant religious sort of hangover thing that hard things are virtuous. That there's virtue in hardness and hardship. Now, I'm not saying the opposite's true. I'm not saying that the virtue is in the easy, or that hardship is wrong.
Right.
But it's not the determinant of where you should go. And just hardship on itself is not virtuous at all. It's suffering for its own sake, and it causes suffering to other people around you. So don't get drawn into sort of hardship is a virtue. There's a baseline of that life is difficult. Don't add any more on top of it. Don't add any more yourself, and move through the difficulties, the natural, let's say there's a natural baseline of difficulties, move through a natural baseline set of difficulties to get to your goal, but definitely don't add to it, or let others add to it. Don't let others add to it.
Yes, so true. And finding the people to help you get there. That idea of community is a consistent thread in, I think, every single conversation I've ever had. Does not matter what we're talking about. Community is so key to getting, to surrounding ourselves with, like you said, successful, like-minded, and sometimes those neutral people, the ones that don't have an agenda. It's so important. And sometimes that requires us not asking those closest to us because they may be too attached.
100%. That is such a brilliant insight. You're exactly right. That's a very important thing to notice. Everyone who is thinking of and does take our advice will 100% encounter that. The people around you now are invested in keeping you the way you are, not because they're mean, awful person. Sometimes they are, but not necessarily because they're bad people, because you fitted together in this current shape. They fitted around you. So they are invested in you being the way that you are, not in changing things, because when you change it, they will experience some loss. Some loss of familiarity, some loss of accessibility to you, some loss of benefit to you that they currently get from you. They will have to adjust. So people in general who know you, who especially the close ones, will want you to stay the same. Like I said, not because they're bad, although they might be, and you need to know that if they are, but because it's good the way it is for them. So expect resistance, and it's okay for them to suffer and be disappointed as you grow and fulfill who you are, because it also gives them the opportunity to do the same thing. So it's okay for the people around you to be disappointed that you want to be a new person.
Yeah, that is something I have told people over and over. When someone else is uncomfortable with our growth, we have a grieving process that naturally takes place on our part and theirs. Wow. It's something to navigate. And I think change, if we're uncomfortable and, we bump up against other people's belief systems, and we bump up against other people's fears. And so our change can cause, if I could call it this, an emotional earthquake, ripples into the world closest to us.
Absolutely. There's a social network, there's an interpersonal network that we're disturbing when we change.
That's such a good way to put it. We're disturbing. But you know what? That still doesn't make it, and I know you agree with me on this, it doesn't make it wrong for you. It's definitely, as women, we separate ourselves from being responsible for other people's emotions. When you talk about making room for yourself, I think another way of putting it is we need to separate ourselves from being responsible for how comfortable and happy another person is.
Absolutely.
And understanding that our growth needs to take place. And maybe it would be good for them to grow too. I can't control it, but it could be a part of the equation.
Absolutely. And if someone loved you, wouldn't they want you growing? I mean, like literally to ask yourself the question, if you love me, really love, not in a romantic, mushy way, but if you love me, as in want the best for me, then you would want me to grow and change and fulfill my potential and move away from what I'm presumably currently not feeling fulfilled, disappointed in the way things are. So that even if it's disappointing for them, you would want that. I mean, everybody who's listening who's a mother would feel disappointed when they saw their child go off to secondary school, like, oh, it's going to be, but you wouldn't stop them from going and make them illiterate, would you? So the same is true for your people who love you and look at you. They might be sad that you won't be available on Saturday afternoons anymore because you're pursuing your singing career. But surely they would feel the joy that you're going off and singing, which is something you've always wanted to do, and you'll come back a fulfilled person.
Absolutely. Well, I'm pretty sure, Valerie, that you and I could spend another hour. This is such an enriching and powerful conversation. And I, of course, didn't know you before we spoke today. And as we've talked, I've realized what incredible insight and depth of perception you brought to this conversation. This is the beauty of what my conversational style does. It allows the person that I talk to, which is you today, to speak some truths and some powerful insights that can be very life-changing for people and so powerful. And I'm just so incredibly grateful that you showed up authentically today, that you shared so many helpful things. It's just, someone's going to need a journal and a pen, maybe listen to this twice. You've really, I hardly tapped into your artistry because you have such a gift of communicating what I think women will need to hear, which is the power, the knowledge, the capability. It is there. It's okay to focus on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very flattered. I really appreciate your compliments, and it is nice when you put your thoughts out there to have somebody notice them and see that they have value. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes. Well, it's what I do, is to meet amazing people and to draw out that amazing information. And it's my selfish gift to me and my generous gift to everyone else. So Valerie, how can people find you and your art?
Well, I have a website, so it's veryvalerieellis.com. I think you'll have links around this video. And so on there is images of the art, there's upcoming exhibitions, there's videos. So if you haven't had enough of me already, you can see more videos of me on the website. And some of the videos are really interesting in terms of explaining the art. So a lot of people have said, wow, that's really helped me understand art more than I had before. So I think people will enjoy just having a look through the website and finding out more about art in general, actually.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. And friends, those of you who are listening, if you are on YouTube, please click subscribe, ring that bell so that you know what's coming up. And the show notes for Valerie will be below the video on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, you can head on over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 290. I will have the links to Valerie there. Again, friends, don't forget to subscribe, to rate, to share this message. These guests that I have on are all carrying nuggets of gold to share with the world, and they're meant to touch as many lives as possible. And today, Valerie has really brought home the idea that, yes, you are here for a purpose. Yes, you have something to accomplish. Yes, you can do the thing, no matter how difficult, challenging, or uncomfortable it gets. And probably because it's uncomfortable and challenging, it gives you something to get up for and to do. And whatever you've done in the first half of your life, you can honor that. But that doesn't mean you can't move in a new direction in the second half of your life. So thank you, friends, for being a part of our conversation today. I look forward to bringing more powerful guests and conversations to you in the future. Take care, my friends. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.